This is After Later Audio's Cumulus. It's a Mutable Instruments Clouds clone, a texture synthesizer. The only sound you're hearing right now is the subharmonicon going through Cumulus. There's no other effects, there's no post-processing. I love using this module to create ambient soundscapes. Cumulus is a really versatile effects module. You can use it for all sorts of things. But its primary use is granular synthesis. It chops up sound into little tiny grains, and you can manipulate those through modulation to create intricate sonic landscapes. Before we get into the video, take the next 10 seconds and really listen. Try to focus in on how Cumulus changes the texture of the sound. Hey everyone, so today is a pretty exciting day because we are going to be putting our first module into the rack. So I don't want this series necessarily to be about me giving specific recommendations for modules, but it's really more about the decision-making process for deciding what modules you choose, and so you can kind of understand how to build up the system. And I'm starting with an effects unit. And the reason I'm starting with an effects unit is I think it's a great place for beginners. Sometimes complex modules can be really hard to understand, or they might not have a huge impact on the sound right away. And it can be a little bit discouraging, or if nothing else, just sort of deflating when you finally get into it and it doesn't have that big of an impact. So I think an effects module is a really great place to start. But let me explain a little bit about how to approach choosing an effects module in case you decide that you want to go out and get something different from Cumulus or Clouds, and just go in a totally different direction. So you can get effects into your system in many ways. You could get Eurorack modules, you could also get guitar pedals, or you could just use plugins on your DAW. I use a lot of plugins and they're great. Valhalla Vintage Verb is one of my favorite effects, and just a totally amazing reverb. Now, plugins have the advantage of being significantly cheaper than many modules and pedals, but they lack that hands-on control. And also, unless you get super complex and creative, they're generally at the end of your signal chain. So if you're looking for just a reverb to kind of fill out the sound, I probably wouldn't get a Eurorack module to suit that purpose. I would just use a plugin that you can kind of set it and forget it at the end of the signal chain in your DAW. In fact, for any effect that I think you're probably just going to set certain parameters and leave them where they're at, you might be better suited to just get a plugin that's cheaper, or maybe a guitar pedal or something like that. But effects in a Eurorack format really shines when you are planning to modulate it a lot, either by using your hands, or especially if you're planning on using control voltage. Now granted, if you have a larger system and you've been down this road before, you might want to have all of your stuff self-contained inside the rack. But I think as far as first modules for someone to get, I think it makes sense to look at effects and think, how am I going to use this? Is this something that needs modulation? And if so, that might be a good one to choose. Cumulus is definitely one of those. It benefits from modulation so much, and when I walk through the patch that was playing in the intro and show you another patch, you're going to see why modulation affects it and makes it so awesome. It really would have trouble existing in a plugin format. And that's why I think it makes sense to buy this as a Eurorack module. So now that you understand that decision-making process, you can either get the After Later Cumulus or a different variation of a Clouds clone, or go out there and search around for whatever effects module interests you. All right, so I'm going to show you how that patch worked, and that will give you a good idea of what Cumulus can do. And I'll also patch up the mother. I don't have anything planned, but we'll see what we can come up with on the fly just to make some crazy sounds. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about some limitations that we had with just having the Cumulus and the Sound Studio, and that's going to lead into our decision for our next module, which I'll feature in the next video. So definitely stick around to the end. So before I get into the patches, like and subscribe, check out my Patreon page, all that other stuff. Okay, I won't get too much into it this time. Let's go ahead and check out the music. All right, so this is the patch that I had hooked up in the intro. So before I even start, I just want to make sure that I get this in this series at some point. If you're coming out of Eurorack modules, the signal is significantly hotter than line level. I'm using these 3.5 millimeter jacks. The other side looks like this. And I'm sending this directly into my mixer. But you just want to make sure that whatever you're coming out of isn't being plugged directly into a speaker, that you're sending it through a mixer or an audio interface or something like that where you can control the gain, because you don't want to blow your speaker or anything. Now, Cumulus does have a control for input gain, so you actually can control that a lot, so it doesn't really matter much here, but I just wanted to make sure to send that message out at some point in the series. So there you go. So I'm going to plug this left and right audio out, and I'm doing that because there's a pan function in here, and I'm sending that into my audio interface. Now to send audio into the Cumulus, I'm coming out of the Subharmonicon's VCA and directly into the input. There's a left and right input, so you could send a stereo signal in there, but I'm going to the left input. The left input is normal, so you can, if you only plug one in, it'll come out stereo like that. I'm actually going to take all the modulation out. Let me go through the controls really quickly. So what Cumulus is doing is basically recording a small snippet of audio and putting it into a buffer, and then it divides that buffer up into grains and plays it back. So it's kind of like this psychedelic delay-ish kind of effect. There's the position, so where it takes the grains from. This is density, so how many grains are sown from that one little bit of audio. The texture knob right here controls whether or not the slice of audio has hard edges or is kind of curved at the end to make it a little bit smoother. And if you turn it this way to the right, a whole bunch, it kind of smears them together. And then this is the size of the grains, so how big of a slice it is. And then of course you can adjust pitch. This is the input gain, and then this is the blend knob or the amount knob. I'm going to turn everything down to 0, and what I'm doing is going through the different modes. You have your mix, pan, feedback, and verb, because there's a really nice reverb in here. So I'm going to play the Subharmonicon for you without, it's going through Cumulus, but Cumulus is not doing anything right now, and we'll show you what the reverb sounds like. So that's the sub, just totally clean. Now I'm going to turn up the reverb. So, I mean, the reverb on this thing is just nuts. I love it. It has this airy, almost like a tape sound in the very background. It's just a really great sounding reverb, and it complements the granular synthesis really, really well. So, okay, let's get into the granular synthesis. I'm going to turn the feedback up to about 25%. We'll turn the pan up to about 25%. Right now, the mix is down all the way, and we'll kind of go up a little bit slowly. So now if I set the density to 12 o'clock, that means that no grains are going to be sown. And if I go to the left, the grains are sown in regular intervals. And if I go to the right, they're sown kind of randomly. So we'll start at 12 o'clock, and we'll set our texture to a smooth-ish texture and a small size, and we'll get an almost like pseudo delay. So I'm going to turn up the mix. And you're still not really hearing any granular synthesis because this is set to 12 o'clock. But as I turn this, you can start to hear that subtle delay. And if you turn the pitch, if you turn the position, you can hear that delay hits really close to after the note. And if I were to turn it this way, there'd be a lot of space in between when the delay echo kicks in from when the original note is sound. And that's because the position on the recording has changed. And this would make it longer. Now what freeze does is it takes that recording, and right now there's constantly recording going in and into the buffer, and it's slowly moving along. What freeze does is it stops it from recording, and whatever's in the buffer stays in the buffer. So I'm going to kick that on. You can hear how it kind of stays with it. And you can kind of hear. So as you turn the position, you can hear where the little pluck. So there's all kinds of crazy things you can do with that. So I had 4 sources of modulation coming out. I was using the triangle LFO of the mother. I was using the square LFO of the mother. And then I was also using the DFAM. You can see the sequencers going. And that's because I was using the pitch and the velocity to modulate things. First of all, I had the triangle LFO going into the position. And what I think this does, to my ears anyway, is it creates these kind of like rolling sounds, almost like a marble in a glass bowl or something like that. Let's see if you can hear that. It's a really just subtle but very, very, very pretty sound. All right, so I had the pitch. I can't remember which one I put in which, but the pitch, one of them was going into the size, and the velocity, I believe, was going in. Actually, I'm going to go pitch into density and velocity into size. And so what this is doing, especially the pitch, I have the sequencer on the DFAM going way into negative voltages, way into positive voltages. So what it creates in the density knob is on this side, the grains are regularly sewn, so they're kind of evenly chopped up. If you switch the density to clockwise, then they're randomly sewn, they're randomly chopped up. So with the sequencer on the DFAM kind of switching back and forth, it switches between regular and random. And then also I have the velocity changing up the size of them. So it just adds this kind of variety. You can hear these big swooshes. Pretty cool stuff. And then lastly, the square wave of the LFO is turning the freeze on and off. And again, the LFO is not synced to the clock, so that just adds this extra layer of unpredictability. It's just such a beautiful sound. Okay, I'm going to take this apart and we'll just connect it up to the mother and see if we can make an entirely different patch, something that sounds just a little bit different. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to come the VCA out of the mother and into Cumulus. I'm going to go ahead and set everything back down to 0 again. Let's just go ahead and program in sequence on the mother. That sounds pretty cool. So now let's go ahead and first of all, let's turn up our reverb. I'm not going to turn it up as high as before because this is a much quicker and denser pattern. So we're just going to leave it a little bit lower. So you can already kind of hear that there's some pretty awesome stuff going on. Let's plug in some of the same modulations that we were using on the last one. So I'm going to go triangle LFO into the position. All right, so there you have it. I hope that gives you a really good idea of how Cumulus works. If you notice, when we were making those patches, we were only sending the subharmonicon through or the mother through, but we really didn't have a way to send the entire sound studio through Cumulus. So that wonderful reverb, it might sound out of place if only the mother was playing it and nothing was playing on the subharmonicon or the DFAM. So that's just one of the limitations that we had, is that we couldn't plug them all through together. So the next module that I'm going to showcase is a simple mixer. This is a DIY build. I'm going to focus a lot on DIY builds throughout this whole series. This comes from AI Synthesis, and it's a very, very, very basic module, but it's important to have some of these utilities in your system. So that's what the next video is going to be about. We're going to use our mixer with the Cumulus and the Sound Studio to come up with some different ideas. I'll show you how this can mix audio and CV to create interesting effects, and we'll see what we come up with. I'll also give some alternative mixers if you don't want to do it yourself. Tons and tons of options out there. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between mixers and VCAs. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments section what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you when we talk about mixers.